Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm sharing with you another real-time tutorial, this time focusing on a feather, which has been taken from Patreon and my website, and this is the first in a small series looking in detail at different feather forms. So if that is something that you are struggling with, then carry on watching because this one is for you. The reference photo for this was taken from Pixabay, and I've left a link below in the description so that you can download it and follow along as well. There's no specific colours or anything listed for use in this, as I really wanted to use this as a lesson, as an exercise for you to pick your own colours and use your own judgment when doing this. So not only do you get that sort of colour picking element, you also get the added elements of forming a feather as well. I'd love to see your creations made when following this tutorial, so make sure you join my Facebook group listed in the description below, and also give me a follow over on Instagram and use the hashtag Amie Howard Art when you are posting your works in progress or your finished pieces. I really do love to see them. But if you're excited to get on with this, then let's get started. Hi, welcome to the first feather tutorial in this mini feather series. We'll be working through a few different types of feathers, some like hummingbird type feathers, some more like furry type feathers, all different kinds, but we're going to start with some tail feathers or some wing feathers of a macaw, and we're just going to start. I've got a blank page here and I want to just talk you through the process of how I would draw and map these out and what kind of things I would be mapping out when looking at the reference, and then we'll get into the colouring and explaining sort of where the shadows are within the feathers and that kind of thing. So this is just the beginning intro into this short feather series. So as you can see, I said I have a blank page. This is 4 inches by 5 inches, and this is the Fabriano Artistico hot pressed watercolour paper, the 140 pound weight. Now I'm just using a mechanical HB pencil just to draw my outline here. So I'll supply the reference for you for this. This is from Pixabay. I just searched in feathers, and this is one of the ones which came up and I thought would be really interesting because you've got kind of like an iridescent nature, you've got the blend from different colours, and you've got quite a lot of shadows and sort of defined individual feathers, which is what I wanted to explain to you guys first of all. So when you are drawing out your feathers, what you want to look at are the individual feathers. So like you would with fur, you'd look at clumps of fur, so little colour sections within the fur. With the feathers it's a lot more easier to do this because you do have like a defined area and defined line that denotes where the feather stops and starts. So I'm just going to start by mapping in some of the feathers at the top here. So there's one that kind of goes off to the side here, so I'm just going to map this in, and I'm just following the edges of the feathers for this. Now, usually I would sketch onto a cartridge paper, but as this is just a short demo, I thought that it would be okay for me to just sketch straight into or onto my Fabriano paper. So you just want to trace around the edges of your feather first. So this is a really obvious area to sketch in, and you also want to add in your middle line. So the line that goes down the centre of the feather, the kind of the bone which comes down this very centre of the feather. So once you've got your first feather in like this, then you cannot work on your next section. So we're just going to add in the next feather. Just lightly sketching them in, and again just adding down that middle line as well. And then the next feather, there's like a small one at the top here that you can just see the very tip of, so I'm just going to add that small one in. Then you have another one which is just here, which is just sort of peeking at the top as well, so I'm going to add that one in. So again, you're just looking at the edges of the feathers. It's really obvious to see where the edges are. And the middle line down each feather as well. Now the middle line, when you're adding it in, is going to help to denote the direction in which you need to shade the feather. So that's a really important factor to add into your line drawing when you are creating a bird or any kind of, or just drawing a feather as a study. So this nice long one down here. And again, that middle feather line. And there's a couple of others down here as well. Like so. So once you have everything mapped in, then we can move on to adding in the shadows and the colour. So now that we have the sketch all sketched out and you've got the middle lines, you can somewhat see the direction of the feathers, and by having an accurate sketch down you can see the angle of the feathers, which is one of the important things that you need when creating any kind of feather. So the next thing that we need to do is obviously to start adding some colour. Now I've chosen these feathers because we have that nice tonal shift and because there are some really obvious shadows. And this is really important when it comes to creating feathers, is getting those shadows and getting it to look like the feathers are laying on top of one another. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start from this side and work down, because that's the way that the shadows are sort of cast. Usually I'd work from the left to the right because I'm right-handed and to avoid smudging, but on this small study it's not too much of an issue. So the first thing we're going to do is just lighten the sketch. Now this isn't always necessary to do when you're drawing feathers or using colour pencil for any kind of portrait, especially when you have dark feathers. So if you have like black feathers and you're trying to create like dark shadows in between, you don't necessarily have to lift the graphite, don't feel like you need to. But there's some light colours shown within these feathers, so I'm just going to lift the graphite just with a kneaded eraser. Just going to roll the kneaded eraser over it and just lighten the sketch. Now I haven't provided any line art for this one because I feel like it's important to just sketch down some feathers and get familiar with the shape of them and the feeling the shape of them with your pencil. Now I haven't given any colours or anything for this because I thought it would be a fun exercise for you guys to just pick out your own colours as well. I thought that would be quite a fun thing to do, and then we can see how many different types of colours and feathers that we have and see how everybody sort of interprets that. So this is a bit more of like a creative lesson. The first thing that I'm going to do though is just line off the top so we get a nice clean edge up there. So I'm just using some Scotch Magic tape. This is just low tack tape. It's not going to peel my paper or anything like that when I lift this off, so I'm just going to lay this down so get a nice clean edge there. So one of the first colours I'm going to use is an earth green yellowish. You can use a lighter green. I might even go in with some light green, maybe a little bit of yellow as well. So the key to creating sort of tonal shifts in feathers like this and sort of iridescent looking feathers is to use similar colours. So for this instance we could use these kinds of colours, because we've got a yellow which is then shifting to a bit more of a green and then a bit more to a darker green. So these colours would complement each other really nicely. And as we're shifting into blue, adding in something like a dark phthalo green or a cobalt turquoise or cobalt green like this, a colour palette like this would be perfect for iridescent feathers and tonal shifts in feathers like this as well. So use colours that are similar, like this kind of selection that I've got here, but we're going to focus on the green part, and there is a little bit of like a greeny goldy kind of colour in these feathers as well. Now one of the things I want to make sure that you don't pay too much attention to on this is the sort of weird pattern that's going on with the feathers. I think this was a reference photo that has been sort of grabbed from a screen, and it's just kind of creating that weird kind of look on the feathers. There's a little bit of grain to the feathers as well, but we're not focusing too much on the textural element of these feathers. It's more about getting to grips with the shape of the feathers and looking at the shadows and everything. So we're going to start off by putting down some of the lighter colours. So use the lighter colours that you've picked out for this, and we're going to work on the whole of the feather. So we're not going to go into like one half, we're going to work on the whole of it. And you also want to make sure that when you're shading and colouring feathers like this, that you look at the colours and where they are. So if you do have two-toned feathers like this, you want to make sure that you don't add any yellow green into the blue area, because then that's going to create a greeny blue area when you want to keep the blue area really nice and bold and blue. So I'm just going to shade this down, and when we're shading we're just having a loose grip on the pencil and just putting really light pressure through the pencil to lay down some colour. And when you're shading as well, you want to shade in the direction that the feather is going. So in this case we're following the middle line and shading in that direction, so we're coming down in sort of this direction, and depending on how you have drawn your middle line, that's how you're going to shade. So if you have drawn your middle line coming this way, then obviously you're going to shade coming this way, because that's the direction in which the feather's going. So paying attention to the middle line is really important when it comes to your shading for this particular type of feather. Not all types of feathers have middle lines, and some of them will kind of go outside of this general rule. But generally speaking, your feathers tend to follow the direction of the middle line, because that's where all of the little fronds that are stuck together sort of stem from. They go in this direction. So I'm just putting a couple layers down of this first colour. And I'm also just going to add the light blue tip to the feather there, so I'm going to pick out a nice pale blue and add that in as well. So we want to put down our lighter colours first, and when you're adding down the sort of tonal shift area where it does sort of transcend into another colour, you want to make sure that you blend the two colours, or however many colours that you've got going on, together. And again, you want to make sure that you are shading in the direction of the previous layer as well. We're just building up the colours just by shading and working in the same direction. Now if you need to do a little bit of blending, you can take a white pencil, or if you don't fancy blending or anything with the pencils themselves, if you find that you blend better with a solvent or a blender pen or anything like that, then just grab that out and just do a little bit of blending so you've got a nice smooth surface. I'm actually using the polychromos white doing this blending here. So I'm just going over the whole surface with a light pressure to blend everything together. So I'm going to go a little bit darker. I'm actually going to go in with this earth green yellowish, which was the first colour which I picked out. I'm going to start to add this, again going in the direction of the feathers, of that middle line. I'm going to combine this with another type of green as well. And you just want to analyse your colours, just lay them on top of one another and blend them into surrounding areas as well. And every now and then I'm going to go in and blend with the white pencil. So just using a light pressure and just shading back and forth really gently. Combining a few colours. So pretty much shaded the whole thing with a couple of layers now, and then you can see the green starting to intensify. Now feathers do require quite a lot of layering to get them to look really nice and smooth and slick. But you want to start off with your layers really light, and then as you progress and you get more layers down, you'll see that the tooth of the paper starts to flatten out a little and your feathers do become nice and smooth. But you may need to increase the pressure on your pencil at certain times to get a really nice smooth look. I'm going to just darken up the blue on the end there as well. So I'm going to go for a bit of an ultramarine and mix it with that lighter blue still. So I'm just using a light pressure and I'm blending the blue into the green so we get this really nice shift of colour. Now also down the middle line you can see that there's a little bit of a blue tone, so I'm just going to add some of the lighter blue down the very centre. And also just blend this lighter blue into the green a little bit more, again just to get that transition. Now if you have sort of brown toned feathers or ordinary toned feathers, then you would just do exactly the same here but with your brown and grey tones. So you'd still have lighter areas, you'd still have like a little bit of a tonal shift, so you would just apply the same process but with your more neutral toned colours. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of darker green just to start developing the shadows on the right hand side here, and there is a little bit more of like a browny edge to this feather as well, so we're going to blend the darker green into the brown edge. So where we do have the shadows around all of the edges of the feathers, that's where you do tend to get a little bit more shadow and a little bit more of a darker tone on the actual feather itself. I'm just going to introduce a bit more of a yellow tone as well. Just get this really nice sort of harmonious colour going on throughout here. And I'm just going to take a bit more of a neutral tone on the side here. So I'm just using some browns just to blend this bit in. And it is a lot darker on this side as well, so we're just going to get a whole lot darker down here to increase the pressure. And to add some shading, I'm just going to use some of the neutral tones just to blend throughout here as well. Now obviously you can see that the very centre of my feather is still really light, so we just need to continue working on darkening that just by increasing the layers of the sort of mid-toned greens here. And using the mid-tone greens on some of the darker areas as well is going to help to blend everything out. And again, if you're working on something that's not green and blue, you just want to continue working with whatever colour your mid-tones are on the type of feathers you're trying to convey. Again, just going in with a slightly darker green as well, just adding in a little tiny bit of texture as well, so adding in some lines of the feathers, just giving a really sort of gentle sweep in the direction that the feather's going, just to sort of give the impression that there's a little bit of texture on there. Now for the middle line, what we're going to do is just darken. I'm going to use some dark sepia to darken mine, but I'm also going to use a little bit of a dark blue as well. So something like a dark indigo would be perfect. I'm just going to gently line down the middle. And then we're just going to blend that out just by creating little lines just coming off of that middle central line. I'm just going to sharpen this pencil real quick. Just blending it in just by creating some tiny little lines just coming off of it, just to give the impression that there's a little bit of texture there. I'm just going to blend through the blue a little bit more towards the tip of the feather. And just help to blend everything together a little bit more as well. Okay, so we have our first feather already in. So now what we need to do is work on the second feather, and this is where we're going to start to build in some of those shadows. Before we just go into that, I'm just going to darken this edge a little bit with some of the dark sepia, just like that. So the key with feathers is that you want to keep everything kind of nice and smooth. You don't want to add too many lines or anything like that, because otherwise it's going to end up looking quite furry. You just want to keep everything really nice and smooth as possible. Really nice and blended out. So the next feather, we're going to do exactly the same thing. It's got the same tones as what's going on in this one. So we're just going to lay down our first tones, so our base tones. I'm going to leave the end again for the blue. There's a little bit more sort of blue dotted throughout this as well, so I'm going to pretty much just shade this right hand side half all with the blue and blend it really nicely into the green. So just blending some of the blue through the green areas. And we can just build on some of those blue tones as well. So at the moment, if we kept it how it was here, it wouldn't look too three-dimensional. In fact, it looks really kind of flat. The thing that's going to help this look three-dimensional is adding some shading underneath this first feather. So we'll get to that in a minute. We just need to build up our base tones. So when you have feathers and they start to look like this, or you're sort of colouring them all in like this to begin with, and it's just really looking flat, it does take a little while for it to come together before you start adding like all of the shadows underneath. You just have to be patient and just work on your feather, making sure you're working in the correct direction. And go in with the mid-tone green now. You can see the feathers are starting to blend together. So I'm just adding a few more layers of this mid-tone green. And I'm just going to blend with the white just to smooth it out. And we just need to build in a few darker tones and start to get a little bit dark on this blue section, and we can start to add the shadows around the previous feather as well. So one of the things, you don't want to go in like too prematurely and add the shadows in around the feathers, because then you can't build the correct tone underneath the shadows. So I'm just going to go into the tip of the feather here and just start to add some of that ultramarine, which I'm using for my blue tones. I'm just going to blend out with a little bit of a lighter blue. So getting really nice and dark on the end of the feathers here. Okay, so now we can start to add in some of the darker greens and the more sort of neutral tones. We're going to start to build in some shadows around this first feather. So I'm just going to take some more of this sort of mid-tone greens, the brighter greens, and just flesh in a bit more colour throughout this feather here on both the left and the right hand sides. Just really blending all of the colours into one another. On this feather here, I'm actually going to use a tiny little bit of a solvent blender just to show you the difference. So I'm using the Finesse blender pen. So this will just help us really smooth everything out. It's just going to brighten the colour as well. Get some really beautifully blended areas and colours, and everything looks really nice and smooth. Let's just add a little bit more of sort of mid-tone green through here. And then building in some darker areas around the first feather now. So this is where we start to build in some of the shadows. So you want to just start off by going directly next to the first feather and just adding in some of your darker colour. You can build in an even darker section as well with a further darker green. So you just want to pay attention to how the shadow looks on your reference as well as what you're drawing. I'm going to darken that by going in with some neutral tones. So the shadows on the feather, primarily you're going to build up with the colour that the feather is, then you're going to start to go in with some more sort of neutral tones just to really darken it up and add that sort of element of shadow. So I'm going to add a little bit of walnut brown, and I'm also going to add in some dark indigo as well. And you want to keep it really nice and kind of precise around the first feather, adding in a few little intersection areas where you have them, so where the feather sort of separates a little bit. You just want to really deepen the shadow directly next to that first feather. Also just adding in a little bit more of a neutral tone around the right hand side of this feather here. So what we're doing is just going around the feather with some of our darker greens, really sort of blending the darker greens through to the mid-tones as well. So you just want to keep the shading nice and light. We're just slowly building in the darker colour. So you can see that this bit's a lot lighter here, and where we have added the shadow you've got this really nice dark area. Now you do want to make sure that you do taper the shadow out where necessary. Sometimes it is quite a hard shadow line, you just need to pay attention to your reference and sort of add what you feel is right. So I'm just going to go all around this first feather. Just want to work in the direction that your under feather, the second feather, is going in as well. Once you've darkened up with one colour, you can go over with another, really blend it through some more. You can see you've got a really nice defined shadow, and now it looks like this feather here is sitting on top of this second one. And with your darker colours you can start to add in a little bit of detail which was going on this first feather at the tip as well. You can also just fill in any sort of remaining sections where you haven't quite made it to the edge there on the first feather. And again, you just want to make sure that you sort of blend out the shadow a little bit, just by using some soft lines of your shadow colour working in the direction that the feather's going in. And the same on the left hand side as well. I'm just going to work on enhancing the darker tones on this bit. Adding in a few more green tones. And we're just going to add in the middle line as well, again just by using a darker colour. And I'm going to go over with some of the dark indigo. And then I'm just going to bring off some tiny little lines once again. A little bit of texture and definition of the feather there. I'm just going to build up some colour on the tip as well, just to blend out and sort of even out that tone from the blending. And I'm going to go through and blend this area up here with the solvent blender as well. So I'm just going to take the solvent blender and blend out this section and all of the shadow areas as well. We've got a really nice smooth feather. You've got some nice shadow underneath there as well. So I'm going to let that dry and then we'll go in and just enhance some more shadow, so we've got a little bit more definition and really dark area around here. We're going to go in with dark sepia and really darken that up. But whilst we wait for it to dry, we can move on to another feather. So we can start to build in this one, and we're going to just work in exactly the same way once again. I'm going to just put down our base layer. Again, following the direction of this one. This one is slightly coming down more sort of horizontal, more vertical. So just add our green base. And then add in the blue base. So again, you just want to pay attention to the middle line and the direction of the feather, and apply your shading. You want to use a light pressure. So once we've got that base down, then we can start to add in other colours. I'm just going to add in the blue for this bottom feather, so I'm going to add in some of the ultramarine. Once we've added in this colour, then we're just going to go back into the previous feather and just enhance the shadows around there a little bit more. So we've got a little bit of blue going on in there. So we're going to turn our attention back to the previous feather. We're going to go in with a dark sepia, so really dark colour now, and just really accentuate some of these shadows here that really need sort of depicting a little bit more. So I'm just going to go around, add the shading where the shadow's being cast, and then just blending it out into the rest of the feather as well, just by using a really light pressure on my pencil. So I like to hold the pencil to the side when doing this. Gives a little bit more control. I'm also just going to use a little bit more dark indigo. There we go. Now sometimes it does work a little bit as well, just to blend the shadow from the feather underneath into the feather that's sort of sitting on top, just blending a little bit of the shadow in. It's not always helpful, but sometimes it does help, just with the form and dimension of the feather on top. Now when you have added the shadow as well, you may need to go in and just add a little bit more sort of darker shading towards the edges of the previous feather, which is what I'm going to do with this first one here. So I just want to add a little bit more shading on the edges. This edge is fine here, it's all pretty much all dark there. To give the feather a lot more form so it doesn't look flat. So you just need to add in areas of shading, so keeping sort of the central area a little bit brighter, and then having the sort of edges where it's sort of touching these shadow areas a little bit darker. Like so. So we're just going to do that on this second feather as well. We're just going to shade the edges a little bit darker. And any areas where there are feathers sitting over the top and just sort of casting a little bit of a shadow. So you need to pay attention to the way that the feathers lay as well. So on this feather, for instance, there is a very slight feather just above it which is sort of sitting on top of this one here and this one that we're just starting to add the base layers to. It's also sitting on top of this one here. Now from this feather there's going to be a little bit of shadow cast across all three of those feathers there, so we're going to be wanting to add some shading directly underneath that one as well. So you just need to pay attention to where you have feathers sitting over the top of one another and where there would be potential shadows that are falling depending on the light direction. Now this particular bird is sort of being lit from this side, so you'd get the shadows cast in this direction. So you need to make sure that your shadows are all sort of following this direction. So there'll be a little bit of a shadow here, there'll be shadow here and also here, but there won't so much be shadows sitting on this side of the feathers here. So you can see on the reference picture, for example, just underneath this feather where we're adding the base layers, there's a feather here with quite a strong shadow here, and there's also a strong shadow here. But on this side of the feather there isn't any shadow, or there is a little shadow. So you need to make sure that your stronger shadows are sitting in the direction that the light is shining. So you can see we've got a nice strong shadow there and a little shadow here. That's just the edge of the feather, that bit there. Okay, so we're just going to add in a few more layers on this feather here. So I'm going to start to build in the sort of mid-tone green. Just working around some of these feathers here. So then just moving on to some slightly different greens, some more sort of brighter mid-tones. And then working towards getting a little bit darker at the sides here. So just working on darkening. Adding in a few more sort of more neutral greens as well, just to add a little bit of shadow. And we're just going to work on some more of the blue. And a little bit more ultramarine. So you can see I'm sort of getting darker directly underneath this feather here. So what we're going to do is blend this with the solvent. I'm going to use a solvent once again because I kind of like the effect that that gave that feather there. Okay, so everything is nice and smoothly blended out, so we just have to wait for that to dry before we can go in and start to add all of our shadows and all of our darker tones. So as you can see, again, the feathers look really flat, there's no definition between the two, they kind of just look as if they're melded into one. But that will all change as soon as we start going in with some darker colours like we did on this one. And when you start to add more feathers grouped together like this, the more they start to really come to life as a group of feathers. So in this tutorial I'm not necessarily going to be drawing every single feather because it's just going to be a repetitive process. So we're just going to work on this one here and we're going to work on this real dark one here. So we're going to be adding in our base layer for this darker one here first whilst we're waiting for our previous feather to dry. So we're just going to add in a sort of mid-tone base for this because the feather is so dark. So when you do have feathers that are dark and don't really have very much shine, or the shine is sort of the mid-tone what you've got going in with the rest of your feathers, you don't have to go in with a really light colour to begin with, because it's going to be a little bit pointless. It's just going to get lost. It does lay down a nice foundation, so you can put down a lighter colour if you prefer, but it's not really necessary at all, because you're going to be building a really dark colour over the top, so you're gonna lose all of those lighter layers anyway. So you may as well just go in with a mid-tone, use the mid-tones or a white pencil to accent some of the highlights that you've got going on, if there are any within your particular feather. So just adding in a base layer, again going in the direction of the feather, so looking at that middle line and then shading in the correct direction. So I'm actually going to add a couple of layers of this one down. This base, just get really nice and smooth. To get rid of as much of the grain of the paper as possible. Before moving on to a slightly darker blue. So I'm going to move into a sort of Delft blue area, because you've got kind of like a warmer blue tone here, so I'm just going to shade some darker tones. Now this feather has some dark edges, so we're going to be applying the darker, sort of more richer blue to the edges and then blending it through to that mid-tone area. And there is a slightly sort of aqua tone to this as well, so I'm actually going to be adding in some of the lighter tone on top of the couple of layers of the mid-tone. Just very lightly, and just continuing by adding in all of the darker colour around. So the shadows are a lot more sort of instantaneous when you're adding in this kind of feather that's really dark and really shadowed by the other feathers. So we're using some of our sort of dark to mid-tone colours just to add a really nice undertone for our darker colours. You want to make sure that you get some precise areas within these feathers as well. So we're just adding in the dark edges, blending out into the lighter areas, just going back over. Like so, and then we're just going to take a really dark colour now, and we're going to add this to the darker areas and the shadows. And also just making sure that any lighter areas we just kind of blend out with the lighter tones or the mid-tone once again. So just using the mid-tone once more just to go around the feather. Just do a little bit of blending for us. And then taking that darker tone again and really darkening up. Underneath here. And we also need to add the middle line in as well. I'm just going to blend that out slightly, just by doing the same technique as before, just by adding a little bit of shading around the outer edge. Okay, so we're just going to take the mid-tone once again and blend this one under here. I'm just going to use the white pencil just to add in and smooth everything out. Okay, so I'm just going to add a layer of the real dark colour, which is the dark sepia here. Just get some really nice shadow going on here, and this shadow will be accented by, of course, this shadow that we're going to be adding in a minute. This one going around here. There's a tiny little bit of a shadow underneath this feather here, just sitting on the surface of this darker feather. So we're just adding in the shadow with a darker blue pencil. Just a very, very subtle shadow going around this one. It's very subtle. And then you can just see the distinction between this feather and this darker feather now, which is absolutely perfect. And I'm just going to layer a slightly different blue tone over the top. Like so. Okay, so now we're ready to come in and start shading this previous feather. So for this one, we're just going to go a bit darker on the green up here. We've got a little bit of shadowing around. Well, we need to add in the middle line very first of all, so I'm going to use the walnut brown, which I have been using to add in the middle lines. And follow that with some of the dark indigo. Then up here where it's really sort of shadowy right next to this feather, we're just going to shade in a little bit of this dark indigo. And then from that middle line we're just going to add in some of those lines coming off to blend it through and make it look like it's just starting off a slight bit of texture. And down the middle there is a little bit of a highlight as well, so we're going to add that in just by using a hard pressure on the white pencil. Then we can start to add in some of the shadow. So I'm just using the walnut brown on this side, on the right hand side, just to shade that in there. And as we work our way around, it gets a lot darker. So from this point here, I'm just going to work in a line, just outlining the very edge of the feather, so we know where the edge is. And then we can work on this shading on top. So I'm just going to go in straight away with my dark indigo. And just lightly start shading in this shadow. Like so. And then we're just going to taper it out slightly, blend it through. Add in a little bit of texture up here as well. And then we're just going to go over that with some of the dark sepia. Really define the very outer edge of this feather here. So we want a really nice firm edge. And then we're just going to shade and blend that out into the rest of the feather, like so. And that's also what we need to do up here as well, just really get dark directly underneath. So we just need to shade some more on the left hand side, so where you have these slight feathers just sitting over the top, just casting very slight shadow. You want to add some shading there. And just adding some shading throughout the feather as well, just to really blend it all together. So I'm just going to add some more shading to the blue section. Really make sure we blend this through. And add in any highlights where necessary as well. So I'm just using the lighter colours just to blend it back over, create a really smooth surface. So where the tip sort of just curls over as well is where you need to add a tiny little bit more shading. The tips tend to just curl over ever so slightly. So you just need to pay attention to your shadows and add the correct shading. And then just work on each individual feather the more that you shade and the more that you intensify the colours. Like so. Okay, so that's basically all of the steps that you would need to do in order to portray sort of this type of feather. It's not that difficult, you just need to work on your shading and then work on your shadows of each individual feather as you're adding them. So you just need to take it one feather at a time rather than tackling a whole load of feathers. And then hopefully you should have some feathers that look like they're sitting on top of one another. As I said, it does take a little bit of time to just sort of manipulate the shadows and really get the depth that you're after. So you just need to continue working, continue looking at your piece until you're happy with how your feathers are looking. And it is one of the more time consuming efforts when it comes to coloured pencil work. As you can see, these 3 feathers have taken quite a long time, and it's only just a small portion of coloured pencil work. So you can imagine just how much work goes into creating something like a big bird or that kind of piece. But I could continue adding in more feathers, but I think that this is enough for you to kind of grasp the aspect and the kind of technique that I'm hoping that you'll be able to get hold of with this small portion of the feathers. So for the rest of the feathers, all I do is continue the same thing and just add in your base layers, continue to get darker, blend with whatever method you prefer, whether that's a solvent or whether that's using your actual pencils, and then you would start to build in your darker mid-tones and your dark shadow values, and then just start to work on the shadows and the values underneath the feather that is on top. So you always want to make sure when you are drawing these feathers that you look at the initial feather pattern. So sketch out your feather pattern as accurately as possible, and then you want to make sure that you pay attention to the direction of the middle line, because that's going to denote where you're going to add your shading. So as I said, you've got the middle line which sort of comes down this way, so you want to add your shading sort of just coming in that direction, just going off a slight angle as well, because if you look really closely at a feather you'll see that the sort of fronds just come off at a very slight angle. So just going at a very slight angle on your feather will help with the texture, but you don't want to go and shade in this direction if your middle line is coming down in this way. So you want to make sure that you shade in the direction of the middle line. That helps you to sort of understand the direction of the feather. And again, you want to make sure that you work feather by feather to make it easier for yourself and to make it manageable, so that you can see all of your shadows and where they need adding. I find that if you add like a load of feathers down, so if you used to just add the whole thing with base layer, you'd lose the sort of individual areas of the feathers, and it's kind of hard to sort of understand where the directions are and where the shadows will fall. You also want to pay attention to the light direction when you're shading feathers, so see at which angle your feathers or your bird is lit from. So if in this example it's lit from this direction, so all of your shadows are going to be cast on this side, on the left hand side of the feathers. If the light direction was from the left, then all of your shadows would be cast on the right hand side, or in this case there wouldn't really be that many shadows to form. So that is pretty much it. So I would suggest that you continue colouring your feathers. So just work on the last 3 feathers. So you've got this one, 2 here, and then you've just got a small one up here. So just fill in those last 3 feathers. They don't have too much harsh shading. The only one that has harsh shading is just this bit here. So you'll be adding in some shadow just around here, and then around these other 2 you'll just be adding in some soft shadow like we've done around the tip of the feathers here. So you just want some really nice soft shading. And that's pretty much it for the basic feather shape and the basic feather principle. In other tutorials we will be working on some hummingbird feathers, we'll be working on the really soft fluffy owl feathers, we'll be working on some different colours as well. We'll be working on another macaw piece where we will be working on some of those really kind of short lined sort of chest feathers as well. So we'll be working on a whole bunch, and I'll be explaining the techniques and everything that I find really useful and valuable when adding feathers to your birds or feathered friends. So that's it for this one. I will see you guys in the next feather tutorial. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed following this one and have learned a little bit more about what to look for when drawing feathers and the importance of those shadows. If you want more tutorials like this, looking in depth at subjects and a whole other load of subjects, then make sure you head on over to Patreon on my website, have a little sign up session there, and you'll get access to a whole load of content which will help you improve your coloured pencil drawings. Trust me. If you like this video, then make sure you hit that thumbs up button, and if you're new around here and want more juicy coloured pencil content, then hit that subscribe button and make sure you tick that notification bell while you're at it so that you never miss an upload. I post new videos every single Friday for you. That's it from me today, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!